Kiev is deploying military vehicles to eastern Ukraine, with the interim government pledging to deal with protesters there in less than 48 hours. This footage was shot near Donetsk. It shows over a dozen armored vehicles moving through the countryside. Here you can see the locals are trying to stop them, without any success, though, as the trucks drive through the crowd. Donetsk is where the vehicles are believed to be heading, is among several cities in eastern Ukraine gripped by dissent against the post-coup government. Our team managed to speak to one eyewitness to find out what is going on there.
At about 2 p.m., we received information that military hardware had arrived at our local train station. We went there and saw APCs, military vehicles and troops. The whole town gathered nearby. The soldiers tried to start moving and the people tried to stop the vehicles. The soldiers twisted the arms of pensioners. There were two young men standing there and they drove right over their feet. I was pulled back by the local miners when I tried to stop the vehicles. They didn't even look at who was in front of them. The men started shouting for them to stop, saying there were girls and women in front of them, but they didn't care. We were later told they were the troops from Crimea that were disbanded and had joined the National Guard.
Meanwhile, in Donetsk, crowds outside the local military base have been besieging the buses with armed men inside who they fear are U.S. mercenaries. By now, all of the personnel have allegedly left the vehicles and have moved back onto the base. RT was able to speak with an eyewitness there. Let's take a listen.
I've seen a bus parked with armed men on the city's main streets. There were around 30 of them. They were wearing camouflage uniforms that I've never seen before, but they were definitely different from Ukraine's military uniform. From what I've heard, 3 such buses carried armed men to the regional military registration and enlistment office, and they were seen later on patrolling the territory.
Witnesses also reported armored vehicles moving towards the city of Lugansk. There, as well as in Donetsk, protesters are still occupying local administrative buildings. That is, as Kharkov has recently seen a violent crackdown on activists there that resulted in dozens of arrests. Squads of radical right-wing militants have also reportedly been heading to the east of Ukraine, but as RT's Maria Finoshina reports, the demonstrators are set to continue their fight despite all of the threats.
These barricades around the regional administration building in Donetsk appeared here on Tuesday. You can see people used tires, barbed wire, bags with sand, and actually so many other things to fortify the entrance of this building, fearing, as they say, the repetition of events in Kharkov. In the region's capital, police cleared all the governmental buildings taken earlier by similar groups of protesters in a very violent, brutal way, detaining around 70 participants of them, following what Interior Minister called later an anti-terror operation. And we heard earlier from the authorities in Kiev that all those responsible for the sieges of governmental buildings in major cities in eastern Ukraine, those who are considered by authorities in Kiev as separatists, will be severely punished. This is why it's clear people here, protesters, are worrying about their destiny. Well, we also hear from the members of Pravy Sector, Ukraine's notorious neo-Nazi movement, that they're also on their way to the east of Ukraine. They say that they already liberated the city of Odessa and Mykolaiv, and now it is time for Donetsk and Lugansk. It is another eastern Ukrainian town where local security office building and the building of National Bank still remain occupied by protesters who do not recognize authorities in Kiev and say they will not obey their orders, and say they are waiting for a referendum to be held here to get more independence from Kiev. So far, the situation is peaceful, but no one can guarantee that it will stay this way, and no one can predict what may happen next. Maria Finoshina, RT, from Donetsk in eastern Ukraine.
Maria is at the scene right now and talking to protesters and also taking photos showing how the city center currently looks. You can find it all on her Twitter feed. Now, as protesters in the east brace for further crackdowns, some members of the Ukrainian parliament are proving that there is ample reason for their fear. Here is how one MP from the nationalist Svoboda party thinks the unrest should be dealt with.
I'm sorry, but I would have just shot them dead. Look, the enemy is operating in our land. What are we talking about? So today's response is absolutely warranted, but the measures should be much tougher. Our people have sacrificed their lives, so these creatures that are coming here deserve only one thing, which is death.
Some very strong words there. However, Ukrainian police are not very eager to follow the orders and clamp down on these protesters. Journalist Graham Phillips is in Donetsk and witnessed one display of their solidarity with demonstrators.
Now, it's calm at the moment, but last night we saw something rather different. Late last night, around 11 o'clock, a bus pulled up in the adjoining Pushkin Boulevard. That caused ripples of anger, of expressions, of aeration in the crowd here, who immediately marched to that bus with about 50 police officers, were heckling that bus. There were altercations in terms of strong language exchange. There was pushing. The police officers inside looked very uncomfortable to be there, and the crowd were chanting, "Traitors," asking why they were there. The police inside, one of them showed a text message to the pro-Russia activists bearing the message that we are with you, we're with the people, and we have no intention of storming the building. The bus shortly afterwards left, the crowd dispersed, and calm was resumed here in Donetsk.
Moscow has expressed concern that Kiev could be using mercenaries to quell the unrest in eastern Ukraine. According to local activists, around 100 American contractors are stationed in the Donetsk airport, together with Kiev National Guard and right sector militants. Aleksandr Turchinov has more on the possible involvement of foreigners in clamping down on dissent.
In a span of less than 2 months, we've seen Washington go from cheering for protests with takeovers of government buildings in Kiev to exactly the opposite, now trying to help Kiev quell the uprising in the eastern part of Ukraine. Moscow has accused the U.S. of sending mercenaries disguised as Ukrainian Special Task Police to crack down on protesters. On its website, Greystone says it's providing various security services. Details are nowhere to be found. Greystone is known as a mercenary firm that the U.S. government hires for specific operations, with secrecy as its major suit. The firm has denied its presence in Ukraine.
It has an independent capacity in the sense that it's an independent business. That gives it the ability to plausibly deny any allegations and allow the U.S. government to say, we don't know.
Greystone was founded by Eric Prince, who also created the infamous military contracting firm formerly known as Blackwater. Blackwater received hundreds of millions of dollars to protect U.S. personnel in Iraq and Afghanistan. The mercenaries became known for their recklessness. In one incident in 2007, a group of Blackwater contractors shot and killed 17 Iraqi civilians and wounded 20 others at a square in Baghdad. No one was held accountable.
But we have to recognize that this leopard cannot change its spots. It is the same beast. And it's a predatory organization. It's accountable to no one. It works in the shadows. And as a consequence, the people of the world have to fear them.
Because of the bad reputation Blackwater has gotten from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, its management has rebranded and renamed the firm several times. It was called Z Services at one time, and it was from Z Services that Greystone split off 4 years ago. Some lawmakers are pushing the Obama administration to arm Ukrainians.
I want to know, and I think the American people should know, and maybe most importantly, the people of Ukraine should know, why won't we give them some defensive weapons?
With respect to arming and providing assistance to the Ukrainians, the fact is that we are currently working with Ukraine to determine their requirements across the entire security sector.
Some carefully worded statements by Washington to keep the extent of its operations in Ukraine largely unknown. In Washington, I'm Ganesh Chekyan, RT.
Now, when asked directly about Greystone's involvement, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry assured Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov that no confirmation of that had been found.